When you think about the vacuum of space, you probably imagine the freezing cold. But spacesuits are designed to perfectly insulate astronauts against extreme environments. Because of this, the immediate danger isn't freezing, it's overheating. During a spacewalk, astronauts perform intense manual labor, which drastically raises their metabolic heat. Trapped inside a perfectly insulated bubble, this heat has nowhere to go. And without an active cooling system, they wouldn't survive. This is where the Portable Life Support System, or PLSS, comes in. While it is a highly complex system, for this project, we're just going to focus strictly on the thermal subsystem. There are four main components to our thermal loop. First, the liquid cooling ventilation garment, or LCVG, a tight-fitting garment worn under the spacesuit. The LCVG basically provides the astronaut the same function as sweating would on Earth. Over 100 meters of fine tubing run throughout the suit, pushing cold water along the astronaut's body, absorbing their body heat generated by physical labor, and then carrying it into the PLSS, where it is also used to cool electronics. Second, the pressurized pumps and tubing that transport the water. Third, the spacesuit water membrane evaporator, or SWIMMY, which is the next generation heat rejection component designed for the Artemis missions. And last, the feed water tank, which supplies fresh water to replace whatever gets evaporated by the SWIMMY. Before we proceed, let's take a more in-depth look at the SWIMMY, how it works, and how it can be thermodynamically modeled. The warm water that has absorbed heat from the astronaut and electronics enters the SWIMMY. The SWIMMY is essentially a pressurized chamber that contains multiple layers of a porous membrane. This membrane has microscopic holes that are so small that liquid water cannot fit through. Only water vapor can. The pressure inside the chamber is adjusted so that only the highest temperature water particles are evaporated, and thus allowed to escape through the membrane and vent into space, carrying their thermal energy out of the system. Now, if you want to thermodynamically model the SWIMMY, it's not very complicated. We consider the SWIMMY to be a control volume operating at steady state, with no external work being done and no heat being transferred across the system boundary. Therefore, we can consider both Q dot and W dot to equal 0, and all we are left with is a mass enthalpy balance equation, where we know that water entering the system is a saturated liquid, and the water leaving the control volume is a sum of the vapor going into space and the liquid being recirculated. Let's break down the enthalpy. On the inlet side, we have the mass flow rate of the warm water multiplied by its specific enthalpy, which we can approximate as the specific heat times temperature using this relation. But on the exit side, the flow splits. The vast majority of the water remains liquid, however, a tiny fraction is forced through the porous fibers, undergoing a phase change to become a vapor. That vapor has a completely different energy profile. To understand the cooling, we have to look at the vapor's enthalpy up until it reaches the chamber temperature, plus the amount of energy is required to change phases. As the vapor escapes, it physically carries this latent heat out of the system. And plugging all of this information into the final equation looks like this. And you can derive the overall temperature change equation as the following by doing some algebraic substitutions. Using this relation, we can plug in mass flow out plus the mass flow of the vapor out in for mass flow in. After distributing and combining like terms, we can then divide both sides by the mass flow out times the specific heat constant to arrive at the change in temperature equation. Now to do an overview of the system as described up until this point. To consider it as a thermodynamic cycle, we'll start with the metabolic heat generated by the astronaut, which we'll define as our input Q metabolic. The chilled water in the LCVG absorbs this heat. Pumps then push this water around the control loop, where it also absorbs heat from the suit's electronics and delivers it to the SWIMMY, which removes the heat in the method previously described. The lower energy, cooler water remains in the loop and is recycled back to the astronaut, while the feed water tank injects fresh, cool water to replace what was evaporated by the SWIMMY. In conclusion, that's how you stay cool inside a perfectly insulated spacesuit. We input metabolic energy, and we output heated water vapor that carries the energy into the vacuum of space. And we can represent both the cycle and the thermal design of each of the components using the first law of thermodynamics. Where in this example, we're considering the system or the system boundary to encapsulate the entire thermal control loop. I know this has been a lot to take in over a short period of time. So, to tie all of this back to the bigger picture, in the engineering of human spaceflight missions, astronaut survival is a baseline requirement. Thermal design of a spacesuit and its components is not just about comfort. It can quite literally mean life or death for the astronaut. In this case, they could easily overheat and lose consciousness, or worse, if the thermal management subsystem does not work as intended, which is why the thermodynamic modeling of the entire system has to be spot on, and why what we learn in the classroom can translate directly to important projects and capabilities in industry. I hope you all learned something and have a new appreciation for the engineering design of a spacesuit. Thanks for watching.